Chapter 11. A Pact of Chivalry. When he had finished his trading in Syria, Abu Talib returned to Mecca with his nephew, who continued his solitary life as before. But his uncles saw to it that he, as also Abbas and Hamza, had some training in the use of weapons of war. Hamza was clearly destined to be a man of mighty stature, endowed with great physical strength. He was already a good swordsman and a good wrestler. Muhammad was of average height and average strength. He had a marked aptitude for archery, and gave every promise of being an excellent bowman, like his great ancestors, Abraham and Ishmael. A powerful asset for this lay in the strength of his eyesight. He was reputed to be able to count no less than 12 of the stars of the constellation of the Pleiades. In those years, Quraysh were not involved in any fighting except for a spasmodic and intermittent conflict, which came to be known as the Sacrilegious War, because it had started in one of the sacred months. A profligate of Kinana had treacherously murdered a man of Amir, one of the Hawazin tribes of Najd, and had taken refuge in the impregnable fortress township of Khaybar. The sequence of events followed the usual desert pattern. Honor demanded revenge, so the tribe of the murdered man attacked Kinana. The tribe of the murderer and Quraysh were involved, somewhat ingloriously, as allies of Kinana. The conflict dragged on for 3 or 4 years, in which there were only 5 days of actual fighting. The head of the clan of Hashim was at that time Zubair, full brother, like Abu Talib, of Muhammad's father. Zubair and Abu Talib took their nephew with them to one of the first battles, but they said he was too young to fight. He was nonetheless allowed to help by gathering enemy arrows that had missed their mark and handing them to his uncles so that they could shoot them back. But at one of the subsequent battles, where Quraysh and their allies had the worst of the day, he was allowed to show his skill as a bowman and was praised for his valor. The war helped to fan the growing discontent, which every sedentary community tends to feel with the law of the desert. Most of the leading men of Quraysh had traveled to Syria and had seen for themselves the relative justice which prevailed in the Roman Empire. It was also possible in Abyssinia to have justice without recourse to fighting. But in Arabia there was no comparable system of law by which a victim of crime or his family might obtain redress. And it was natural that the sacrilegious war, like other conflicts before it, should have set many minds thinking of ways and means to prevent the same thing from happening again. But this time the result was more than mere thoughts and words. As far as Quraysh were concerned, there was now a widespread readiness to take action, and their sense of justice was put to the test by a scandalous incident which took place in Mecca in the first few weeks after the end of the fighting. A merchant from the Yemeni port of Zabid had sold some valuable goods to a notable of the clan of Sam. Having taken possession of these, the Samite refused to pay the promised price. The wronged merchant, as his wronger well knew, was a stranger to Mecca, and had no confederate or patron in all the city to whom he might go for help. But he was not to be overawed by the other man's insolent self-assurance, and, taking his stand on the slope of Abu Qubais, he appealed to Quraysh as a whole, with loud and vehement eloquence, to see that justice was done. An immediate response came from most of those clans which had no traditional alliance with Sam. Quraysh were bent above all on being united, regardless of clan, but within that union there was still an acute consciousness of the rift which had divided them, over the legacy of Qusay, into 2 groups, the Scented Ones and the Confederates, and Sam were of the Confederates. One of the leaders of the other group, and one of the wealthiest men in Mecca at this time, was the chief of Taim, Abd Allah ibn Judan, and he now offered his large house as a meeting place for all lovers of justice. From amongst the Scented Ones, only the clans of Abdu Shams and Naufal were absent. Hashim, Muttalib, Zurah, Asad and Taim were all well represented, and they were joined by Adi, which had been one of the confederates. Having decided, after an earnest discussion, that it was imperative to found an order of chivalry for the furtherance of justice and the protection of the weak, they went in a body to the Kaaba, where they poured water over the black stone, letting it flow into a receptacle. Then each man drank of the thus hallowed water, and with their right hands raised above their heads, they vowed that henceforth, at every act of oppression in Mecca, they would stand together as one man on the side of the oppressed against the oppressor until justice was done, whether the oppressed were a man of Quraysh or one who had come from abroad. The Samite was thereupon compelled to pay his debt, nor did any of those clans which had abstained from the pact offer him their assistance. Together with the chief of Taim, Zubair of Hashim was one of the founders of this order, and he brought with him his nephew Muhammad, who took part in the oath, and who said in after years, "I was present in the house of Abd Allah ibn Jud'an at so excellent a pact that I would not exchange my part in it for a herd of red camels, and if now, in Islam, I were summoned unto it, I would gladly respond." Another of those present was their host's first cousin, Abu Kuhafa of Taim, together with his son Abu Bakr, who was a year or two younger than Muhammad and who was to become his closest friend.